And we are live with the Tundra Process Solutions podcast. I'm your co-host, Jaeson Beacock.
And I'm your other host, Erik, Allan. And today we've got a great episode with all the chaos going on all around us. We're going to be talking about the power of the pivot, when to move, when to shake, when to turn things around. And I have two excellent guests. First up, we have Leana Keto, venture leader at Creative Destruction Labs, and Mr. Jaeson Cardiff, CEO of Clean O2 Carbon Capture Technologies. Now, I would like to get a quick pitch on what CDL is. Leana, could you hit it off?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me here. So the Creative Destruction Lab, it's a program for early stage technology startups. We're a program that provides mentorship for these early stage companies. That really helps founders to set smart objectives over a 9-month period, and potentially even gives them that opportunity to seek fundraising and meet with investors.
Love it. And Jaeson, you actually went through this program.
I did. Yeah, I did. It was amazing.
Excellent. Could you maybe give us a little pitch on who Clean O2 is?
Sure. So Clean O2 is the world's first microscale carbon capture system designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the heating industry.
Okay.
Great. That's a great elevator pitch. For those of you that don't know what an elevator pitch is for, it's you get in the elevator, you've got 60 seconds to get to the next floor, and you've got to put the hooks in them. You're selling something, you're trying to get a meeting with somebody, and you guys just did a fantastic job.
Concise and to the point.
Concise
I've
and to
done
the
it a
point.
couple times.
Right, exactly. And I'm sure, Leana, you've heard a few elevator pitches in your time. So I want to paint a picture here for a second. You are going on a vacation and you are going to the beach, okay? You packed up all your beach clothes, you got all your beach stuff, your best summer wear, you hop in your car and you're heading down the highway. Now, as you're heading down the highway, you start to get things like weather reports. Well, the beach is starting to rain here, and signs are coming up mountains that way, and getting weather reports. The weather is fantastic in the mountains. It's amazing. But you've had your heart set on hitting that beach. You've got all the things packed, but all these signs are telling you to head that direction, change direction completely. Now, that's something that's really difficult for an individual to do. You know, when you have your heart set on something, you just, you want to get there, but sometimes things are telling you that this other direction is better. So with the individual, that translates into the startup space, and I think both of you are very aware of what that looks like. And for one, Jaeson, you've done this before. Can you tell us a little bit about how you maybe identified when it was time to change direction and how you changed direction?
Yeah, and that's a really great analogy. I love that. And that's exactly what we went through. We had this mindset, this very defined vision of what Clean O2 was and what our deliverables were, and what our technology was going to do and the messaging, and we were dialed in, or so we thought. And then we attended the CDL event last year, and they really challenged us to question how we were going to make a successful enterprise out of what we were presenting, and they poked a ton of holes in it. And at first, you're threatened by that. Your ego steps in, and you think, well, I don't know these people. Who the hell are they to be telling me how to run my business?
Right.
But then they make a really compelling case for why you should change. And then you start to take it a little bit more seriously. And then suddenly, next thing you know, you're going to the mountains, and you hadn't anticipated going to the mountains. But that's the direction your car is now pointing in, and you kind of have to retool everything that you brought with you to suit going to the mountains. And, that's what we did. Originally, our business model was just an arbitrage play of commodities. So we plug in this technology into your mechanical room. It reduces your carbon emissions and provides some other value. It produces this chemical, and then we sell the chemical to industry, and we make money off of the difference of pricing. And that was it, right? And then, we spoke to people like Derek Hunter and Martin Molyneux and Judy Fairburn and a whole bunch of really high-end people at CDL that really forced you to retool your thinking process. And then you started bringing it internal, and you work with your team, and you're like, okay, we got a big problem here. We got to solve this issue. And the next thing you know, we're like, hey, let's make soap. Let's make our own brand of soap from upcycled carbon emissions. I mean, it's completely out of left field. And if you would have told me, 3 or 4 years ago that our company would essentially be a soap company, I'd have told you were crazy, and that wasn't going to happen yet. Here we are. We're delivering soap all over North America and abroad, and it's starting to work for us. So, and we owe that largely in part to the work that the folks at CDL did in slapping us across the head a few times and saying, hey, wake up, you're making a mistake here.
Well, you're in good company, because some studies out that I've seen, 73% of startups have to shift their business model as they go along, from Series A funding to exit. 73% of small businesses have to do that. And some of the biggest businesses in the world, I have some examples. Nintendo, they're a company from 1889. They started in playing cards and vacuum cleaners, and were a taxi company. And they even had a chain of short stay love hotels. I don't know what a love hotel is, but I can probably guess. Twitter, they did a pivot. They were called Audio when they started. And it was a service to allow people to find a subscription to podcasts. And when iTunes came out, they saw that as being the big force in the market, and made that change. Nokia was a Finnish paper mill in 1865 and transitioned into one of the bigger technology companies in the world. So, like I said, you're in good company. I guess and I'm going to ask Leana this, what do you see in the startups? Like, how can you help, or what are some signs to look for that it's time to make a pivot for a startup? You work with a ton of them. You've probably seen this over and over again. What are some signs that people should look for?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Definitely, I think for a lot of companies that come through the Creative Destruction Lab, they're definitely, going to be making a pivot at some point in time. And I feel like, signs, things to look for, sometimes you can have the best technology, but if it's not the right fit within the market, if there's not a need for it, then it's time to move on, and it's time to figure out what else you can do with it. I think one of my favorite stories for a company that came through our program that I really love is the story of Valadier. And this was a company that was started by a researcher out of Harvard, and they had basically developed this probe that you could stick into liquid, and it would be able to tell you what the components of the liquid were. And so they came through CDL, and our mentors said, this is really great technology. What are you going to do with it? And they said, well, we think the great market for us to go after is luxury perfumes. We think, our product can be used to tell whether or not the perfume that you bought is a counterfeit. And people said, okay, great technology, terrible market.
Right.
So they were tasked with going away and doing some research on some other potential markets. And one option that came up was the oil and gas industry. And, so this was kind of a case where, maybe the founders didn't have that connection into the industry, so they hadn't really thought about this as an option before. But they were able to connect in with some people and really managed to validate that there was a need for this technology in the oil and gas market. And I think what's really cool about it is they actually just closed a $15 million US Series A back in March. So, I mean, this has, been a hugely successful company because now they're using their technology to actually tell you you know, kind of what the components are within your pipeline, and
Right.
yeah, they're getting huge traction. So it's all
Beautiful.
about market need at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's what I love about CDL is you bring so many different professionals that have mastered their game in different markets, and it's very diverse. You know, you're going to get perspectives from so many different industries and so many different areas that's where that creativity can come out. Like, hey, well, have you thought of this?
Mhm.
So one thing I'm interested in is, you know, we often hear like, never give up on your dreams, you know, keep going, keep pushing. How do we reconcile that? Like, never give up versus, hey, it's time to pivot. How do you know when it's there? Like, is there a sign? Is it just too many signals that's saying, hey, this isn't working? What's your perspective?
Yeah, good question. I feel like, you know, there's a few different things. I mean, ultimately, you know, if you're getting signs that you're not getting traction, so you're meeting with customers potentially and they're kind of giving you the, oh, that sounds nice, but they're not committing to you, you know, what is the reason why they're not interested in you? Like, maybe this is just not something that they're willing to pay for, or this is not a problem that they have. So I feel like it comes down so much to really understanding, you know, who you're potentially trying to sell this to.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that's one of the signs that you definitely have to look for.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that you raise an interesting point there, is that we have to watch for the signs when these pivots are coming, and having a good understanding of your market is a great place to start. Listening to people, talking to people, like Jason had mentioned, the CDL, you know, that he was hearing these things from people, and you have to listen to those people when they're giving you this advice and take it seriously. And again, it's really hard to change that perspective. I think, you know, it sounds like you did that, Jason. It sounds like when you were starting to hear these things, and then you took that time to really look in the mirror, and which is hard, like you had mentioned, the ego gets in the way when it's the same for an individual as it is for a company. What would you say were some of the things that helped you take those next steps or be successful? Because I know that, you know, the things that you're doing now are starting to take off, and so what really, after you figured it out, what were the next steps in moving in that process?
I mean, really, it's always keeping your ego in check and
Mm,
being open to the idea that you're potentially wrong about something.
right.
I think you have to be able to listen, and I know that's an easy thing to say. It's a very difficult thing to do, and I've met a number of other startups through CDL, and just basically just in various startup circles where you can see the ego. I mean, it's as
Mm-hmm.
plain as the nose on my face of people that just don't want to listen.
Right.
Right? They've got the right answer, and they're just steadfast in their focus, and they miss opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the things that I had to really get over, was just, you know, do less talking and more listening.
Right.
I still struggle with that, but
Yeah,
you know,
I think
I
we
think
all
I'm
do.
better. Yeah, it's a skill. It's
Yeah, it
listening
is.
is a skill.
Yeah.
The other thing that has been really influential for us is surrounding yourself with the right people. You have to make sure that the people that have aligned themselves with your vision can um, complement your vision. Because, you know, it's that old saying, you could end up with too many cooks in the kitchen. You know, you get 5 different people all pulling in 5 different directions, and you know, you're never gonna pick a path, because you're too busy fighting with yourselves over what is the next best step. But when you have a diverse group of people bringing different talents to the table with a common vision, and you're all focused on accomplishing that vision, you can move mountains. I'm
Right.
blessed, I think, to be able to say that I have surrounded myself with just absolutely amazing people, truly amazing
Well,
people.
you know how you pack the suitcase with all of your swim trunks and your swimsuits when you're heading to the beach? I mean, when you're building a startup, you're putting those pieces in place to get to the beach. When you make that pivot, and specifically to you, did you see, or did you have to repack that bag, or were you able to reallocate your swimsuit to going hiking in the mountain somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, in the pivot, you got to move quick, right? You
Yeah.
can't, there can't be a, you know, a wide radius or
Right.
you'll have missed the turn. So for us, it was a case of quick trial and error in the soap side of things. We had tried making soap for marketing, and we recognized fairly quickly that we suck at making soap.
Right.
My wife and I were not good soap makers. There is a talent to doing it properly. So we recognized we needed to find that talent. And, you know, we found a local provider of soap, all things Jill Hawker, who runs the apothecary down in Inglewood. And we pitched her with the idea of saying, you know, hey, can you help us make some good soap? Because clearly we shouldn't be anywhere near
It makes you dirtier after you.
It does. It was just nasty. And embarrassed because we've given some of that away to customers, and I can just imagine them using it for the first time. How embarrassing that! It's just horrible when you think about it. But she really helped hone us in, and that was a quick fix. That was a really quick and solid fix, because then you've brought that talent in who can provide you with products that help your technology really shine. Same thing with the liquid products, you know. Working with manufacturers in the US. So I think when you have to retool your luggage, I think you got to get creative really quickly, or you'll just miss the opportunity altogether.
Right.
And on that, adapting quickly is a virtue of a startup. But for an existing established business that has infrastructure, has systems set up, is a big ship, and all of a sudden the market changes on a dime, how do existing established businesses set themselves up to be more nimble and be able to pivot? Leana, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's, you know, I've worked for some really large organizations, and when, you know, things change, it kind of feels like you're trying to, you know, kind of right the Titanic. And so much of that really honestly comes down to culture. So I feel like there's a huge opportunity for leaders and companies to, first off, you have to be able to give your employees that option to be able to try things and to fail. And I feel like that's a huge barrier that can then come into place when some of these large organizations really need to figure out a way to move. So, you know, setting up that culture for being able to experiment and try things and be innovative is really, I think, the biggest starting point.
Well, I think you hit on a point there too, is that like you might have to go through multiple pivots before you get to the spot where you need to be, and being able to adapt and change to, you know, you still might not pick the right direction even if you pick a different direction. And Jason, you brought it up too. It can't be a slow curve kind of progression as you're going around with these things. I don't know if Jason is holding really still or he's stalled out there, but we might be missing him for a second. So I'll throw this back at you then. Have you seen pivots go wrong before, or, you know, people doing the pivot and then that's not the right one and then transitioning, or it just being the complete wrong direction, which I'm sure you've seen?
I mean, I think honestly, when it comes down to a pivot, like you have to, it's about being nimble and being ready to fail and fail fast. So like you cannot just once you decide that you're going to pivot, you can't put your head down and just keep motoring along. You have to check in, and is this working? And if it's not working, then you need to pivot again. So it's really about having that, kind of the resilience to keep trying and trying new things.
Would you say that you see more success in organizations that have, say, an innovation group, or people that are solely focused on, are we doing the right thing? What's the next thing coming down the pipe? Can we apply our resources, our technology, or whatever it may be into these new places?
I think, part of it maybe is about having an innovation group. I think, if you're going to try things, I think it's about, having in some ways a scientific experiment. So how are you going to determine if it's working or not? So I feel like that having some metrics that would define success, that's really key for, executing the successful pivot.
Mm-hmm. You made it back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, all good.
We're pivoting. We're nimble.
Yeah, we're pivoting.
That's it. I just pivoted. I went from the Wi-Fi in my house to the Wi-Fi on my cell phone.
Nice.
Right.
You've actually pivoted on the screen as well. So sometimes we're forced to pivot. We don't have a choice. It's not a should I, it's I have to. You adapt or die. Jaeson, in your instance, the primary motivator or the primary goal of the business originally was selling hardware, was selling these big pieces of equipment that help reduce commercial buildings emissions by up to 20%. Like that was the goal. And then luckily you decided to pivot before COVID hit by bringing on soap. And now think about this. If you didn't have that other channel, that other revenue stream, and every single commercial building is locked down, revenues dropped right up, right? So how would you say being forced to pivot versus whatever tea leaves you read, how can we better read tea leaves to pivot? And sometimes it just turns out lucky. What are some insight that you could give some entrepreneurs that are just starting up?
That's a good question. I would say do a systems check, constantly reevaluate what you're doing and making sure that it is productive. I think it was very easy for us in the early days for us to get pigeonholed into just not really checking our work, not really checking our market. We were just focused on making the technology work and getting it out the door without really too much attention onto how the business was going to function. And we just sort of had some ideas of how we thought the business was going to function. And then when that started to fail, rather than ignore it and just say, okay, well, we'll just, it'll take, we recognized, okay, well, let's really seriously take a look at why it's not working and move in a different direction to see if it'll bolster our position. And it's so funny because I remember saying quite adamantly at one point in time, I refused to be a soap company. I wanted to. It was just a marketing tool. I'm not a soap guy. And yet, here we are.
And that's what's so interesting too, because when you had that initial insight, you kind of thought it was a bit of just a gimmicky promotional thing. But then the market started speaking to you. You couldn't keep it on the shelf.
Yeah.
And so then you were listening to the market. And I think that's really important for us entrepreneurs, is to always have that ear. And like you said, keeping your ego in check and making sure that, this isn't about you. It's about achieving your mission. I actually just read Simon Sinek's new book, The Infinite Game. And he makes some really interesting points in there, talking about how companies need a just cause that isn't prescriptive in how they do business. So if your mission is to help people enjoy music, that doesn't say help people enjoy music through CDs, right? So it allows you to pay, as long as you're helping people enjoy music,
right,
that says nothing about how you deliver that. And I feel like setting that up as part of your organization will allow you to pivot, because if all of a sudden your mission and vision is all around CDs and they go extinct, you go extinct. It's kind of that adapt or die. Leana, as far as companies that are trying to figure out what their DNA is when they're first starting up, you've seen so many different startups. What has been successful? What are some of the ingredients to allow a successful startup to be nimble, to pivot and serve the market they're trying to go after?
Yeah, so there are a few things that I can think of on that. I think part of it is, a part of that is really the DNA of the company. So what is your mission? Why are you doing this? So what is important for you about this? I think a huge part of it comes down to teams and founders that are coachable and they're willing to listen to advice, and that, they're open to taking that advice. I feel like those are some of the really key aspects of things. Like you really have to listen to your gut as well, that if, something is not feeling right to you, you're starting to feel like you're pushing a rope up a hill, like you need to sit back and analyze why that's going on and try to fix that.
That's so interesting. And I'm so interested in all these concepts that apply from business to the self and the person, and you're saying like you're pushing against these things as a business or an organization, and it's time to really, that's a good indicator of, okay, it's time to have a look at what I'm doing here. And I always like to get into the personal aspects and, like I said, draw those analogies or the comparisons to the personal self. I'm really interested, and obviously you don't have to answer, but I'm really interested if there's any personal stories and how you pivoted in life and came up against something and said, okay, I'm going that direction now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is a great question. Honestly, like when I started my career, if you would have told me that this is what I would be doing now, I wouldn't have believed you. You know, I started off as an engineer in the oil and gas industry, and, you know, I sort of had this idea of like, this was the trajectory that my life was going on. And, you know, we talk about market forces and needing to find that opportunity to pivot. And, you know, about 4 years ago now, I guess it was, market forces, I discovered, you know, I had a little bit of extra time on my hands when, you know, I was a part of a layoff at a company where they like 400 people go on one day.
Right.
And, you know, this was my opportunity to really kind of sit with my gut, what it had been telling me, which is, you know, I felt like I was just a cog in a wheel and not really, you know, having any kind of an impact, you know, with the job that I was doing. And, you know, so for me, it was a personal pivot. I, you know, managed to go back to school. My husband and I, we moved out to Vancouver, and I did my MBA out at UBC. And that was really what set me up on the, you know, sort of finding the startup and the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And so, you know, with CDL, they were starting up an energy stream here in Calgary, and it just sort of seemed like the right fit that, you know, here I was going to be able to have an impact on the industry that I used to work in. But, you know, really also have an impact for founders going through the program, because being able to give them, you know, this opportunity to really grow their business, it's incredibly rewarding.
I think that's an amazing example of, especially in our province, the dynamics or the challenges that we face in this province. More and more people are going to have to consider that. And, you know, I think it's important to highlight the success stories and the people that are doing that. You know, like it's a tough thing to do. I mean, we've been trained to do this certain thing for our entire careers, and that's just not there anymore. I mean, you know, when you talk about 400 people at once, there's 400 people on the street now looking for those same positions, you know, but we can retool ourselves. We can, like, we just did it in COVID, for crying out loud. I mean, how much did we retool ourselves in a very short period of time? And so that should be very telling of how we can do it as an individual or a society, or whatever it is. So thank you for sharing that. That's a great story. I hope you share it with everybody you can and show them that, you know, these things can be done. Jason, do you have a story, personal story?
Yeah, I guess, you know, I as a former plumber and a gas fitter, I pivoted into that job. I was a oil field worker. I've worked up at Suncor and Albion Sands. I've worked on drilling rigs and rod rigs. And, you know, one thing that I noticed with the oil and gas industry for a number of years was when the season ended and, you know, everything broke up, you didn't know if you were going to have a job come next season.
Right.
So you were constantly, you know, you work your butt off for, you know, months on end, and then the layoffs come, and then you wait for the season to pick back up, and maybe you had a job, and maybe you didn't have a job, or if you did have a job, it was up north, or was in the east, or was in the what. You were all over the place, and it got to the point where it was difficult for me to kind of do anything constructive. So then I realized that, you know, maybe a trade was a good avenue for me to go into. So I was in my early 20s at the time, and yeah, I just I got a job working for a local plumbing contractor, and I found something that I was really passionate about. It took a while. because plumbing's certainly not a glorious job, but after a few years, you find these little niches inside the plumbing industry, and mine was the heating industry, and I found that I really loved it. And so that was a pretty major pivot for me to go from kind of a roughneck rig worker to a trades guy, that was home, working 9 to 7 every day instead of 9 to 9 every day, and making a respectable wage. And so that was sort of my personal pivot.
Well, and another story around transitioning from oil and gas into a completely different space too. And, you went through another pivot where you're starting a startup, like coming from there to there, that's a big space in between. So congratulations.
Thanks. And I think that's kind of the nature of pivots too, is you never see them coming.
Yeah.
I don't think you can prepare for the pivot. I think the pivot just happens.
Yeah.
And then would you say that it just happens? It's like, would you say that the likelihood of success depends on the entrepreneur's ability to be comfortable in that change and that chaos? Or is there some other driving force that would propel them to success?
We've skirted around this to some degree, but money is a big factor in a startup's life. Sometimes you pivot into things because everybody needs money, so you do things that you maybe wouldn't normally do. And sometimes those pivots are mistakes because you pivoted because of the need for resources. So I think it's important to recognize what is the driving factor of the pivot. Is it because you need to keep your company afloat, so you're just sort of taking an avenue that you probably shouldn't have, or are you doing it because it's a strategic move that you can see an actual positive outcome?
Right. I know that you guys have built, as we kind of come to a close here, I know you guys have built your book of knowledge through experience in the space, but is there any literature that you can recommend to our viewers and listeners that might support them in understanding what a pivot is, what to look for, how to do it, things like that?
Or in general, any your favorite entrepreneurship books?
Right.
I like Peter Thiel's 0 to 1.
Nice.
That's probably a favorite of mine. Yeah.
I also feel like Lean Startup is a classic as well.
That's a good one too. Yeah.
Mandatory.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
If you have not read the Lean Startup, buy it now.
Yeah.
Right.
It's so good. But you know what, that DNA that the Lean Startup prescribes is that iteration, that getting data, listening to the market, and before you even pick up a hammer. I'm sure we've all seen it where folks are so focused on and they can't wait to show the market when it's ready, and they can't see it yet, and then they spend all this money and they're like, ta-da, and they're like, yeah, what is that?
Right.
And bust.
Right. We actually implemented Agile into Tundra processes, processes. So working through projects and it's not Agile. What's the other word that I'm looking for? Scrum. That's it. So Scrum kind of philosophy around enacting any type of project within Tundra. So we started on the IT side, and it's probably going to grow from there. And it's that iterative approach where you're constantly checking in. Are we going the right direction? Okay, if we are, then we'll keep going. If we're not, then it's time to make a turn. So,
right, exactly. So Leana, if there's an entrepreneur listening to this episode and they're really interested in learning more about Creative Destruction Labs, where can they go?
You can go to www.creativedestructionlab.com. You can find out a bunch of information about our program, and you can also figure out how to connect in with us through any of the stream pages as well. There'll be some contact information there too.
Beautiful. And Jason, if someone's looking to reduce their emissions or pick up some amazing soap, where can they find that?
Plano2.ca. It's all there.
Lovely.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you both for coming today. That was one of my funnest favorite discussions that we've had. Super insightful. Lots of great information. Thank you for all the work that you do, Leana, at CDL. And Jason, thank you for pushing the hard road to bring clean technologies to industry. So
thank you. Thanks for having us.
Super
Thank you.
valuable. Thank you all. We'll catch everyone on the next episode.